Good morning. Welcome to AP Statistics. Let's pick up where we left off. We had the target handout. So please take that out. We're going to pick up where we left off. Yes. Yeah. Those of you who want to copy, I'm just going to pause the camera. We're back. Okay, so we talked about the words parameter last Friday. I just want to work a little bit more with the word parameter. At least I think I do. How many of you are willing to admit that the word parameter seems a little bit mysterious to you? It's like, what's going on with a parameter? Yeah, and these are students who've had a lot of, I can tell that some of you have had some of the more advanced classes, and it's still mysterious to you. So just a little bit of a word on that. I'm gonna point the camera over here. I've got a little presentation here for you. Some of you are pretty good at texting, you know all the acronyms, LOL, BRB, NVM. More advanced texters know about HADSW, BHOOTL, which means, hey, all day Saturday, we'll be hanging out on the line y equals x 10 minus x over 3. If you get that text from your friends, if you have both the high EQ and the high IQ, you recognize this is not a happy day. You are being rejected from your friend group because they're not. If you get texted parametric equations, and that's a sign of affection. It's like, we care about you. We actually want to meet up with you. But if all you get is the non-parametric equations, if they say, hey, all day Saturday, we'll be hanging out on the line y equals 10 minus x over 3. That's a line with an intercept of 10 and a slope of negative 1/3. It's an infinitely long line. What are the chances that you're going to meet up with them? It's like they're trying to be communicative and let you know what they're going to be doing, but they really don't want to see your face. But if you get a text message that says, hey, all day Saturday we'll be hanging out on the line whose parametric equations are x as a function of the parameter t is 3t, and y as a function of the parameter t is 10 minus t, same line, where the parameter t tells you x is a function of t. So when time is 1, our x coordinate will be 3. When time is 2, our x coordinate will be 6, etc. If you've studied parametric equations before, you're familiar with this. In parametric equations, x and y are a function of the parameter t. T is the parameter, it's just an input. That helps. So now, if your friends text you their parametric equations, then that's a sign of affection. They're saying, hey, at any time. And suppose you even say time 0 represents noon, and they tell you that x comma y, x equals 0, y equals 0 represents the intersection of North Avenue and Route 59. X and y are measured in miles. And basically, they're giving you precise information about their x and y location coordinates at any given value of the parameter or input t. You know what it's like when you receive a text message that contains the parametric equations of your friend group's location. You know they like you, and they want to see you on Saturday at any given time. Likewise, in the normal model, if you were to Google Wikipedia normal model, it would show the normal model equation with both of its parameters, mu and sigma. Now, I was trying to say on Friday that there's only 2 parameters that we care about in stats, and that is mu and sigma, the mean and the standard deviation. That's how they show up in the equation. But you're not responsible for the equation. What you are responsible for is over on the side board. Let's make sure that you see what's going on with parameters in the context of what we study here in stats. We don't study parametric equations of your friend's location in stats, but we do study the normal model in stats. What if the value of the parameters mu and sigma are 0 and 1? Well, what that means is that you're looking at a normal distribution of z-scores, where the mean is 0, standard deviation is 1. Look, we always put the parameters in parentheses. Normal model 0, 1. Parameters are just the inputs to the function that tell us which particular normal model we're talking about. So when the parameters are mu equals 0 and sigma equals 1, then 95% of the distribution is between -2, a z-score of -2, and a z-score of +2. What if the parameters, which are just inputs to a function, they're numeric inputs that we need to determine what model to use? What if it's the IQ score distribution, where the mu parameter takes on a value of 100 and the sigma parameter takes on a value of 16? Then 95% of the distribution is between an IQ score of 68 and 132. Now, in the context of what we're doing here with surveys, we often look at a distribution of percentages. Like, what if we're trying to figure out Peter Roskam? What will his vote percentage be on election day, 1 week from tomorrow? We might take surveys. We might design surveys that are unbiased. And suppose that the mean of the percentages is 65% are going to vote for Peter Roskam with a standard deviation of 3%. Then we can say, well, we're 95% confident that next Tuesday, between 59% and 71% of the voters will vote for Peter Roskam. So this is where a lot of the money is in statistics, is making unbiased confidence statements, giving confidence intervals based on the normal distribution and the parameters mu and sigma. So when we talk about parameters, whether it's in pre-calculus or calculus or statistics, it really just means the same thing. A parameter is an input to a function. Parameter, 4 syllables. It's a fancy word for a necessary numeric input to a function so that you can get the specifics of where the center of the bell curve is and how spread out the bell curve is. Now, to link that back to what we were talking about on Friday with targets, I noticed that some eyebrows were raised when we were talking about the distinction between accuracy and precision. And I think I know why eyebrows were raised. I think that some of you may have thought that accuracy and precision were synonyms. They just meant the same thing. And you might have been thinking, on what basis, Mr. Royce, are you making some sort of crucial distinction between accuracy and precision? Now, how many of you are willing to raise your hands? I won't turn the camera on you. Are willing to raise your hands and say, yeah, I'll admit, I thought that accuracy and precision were basically synonymous. I thought they were the same thing. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of hands going up. About half of the hands are going up that you thought there was no distinction, no meaningful, real distinction between accuracy and precision. All right, so let's then revisit what was going on here, because it's related to our discussion of the parameters mu and sigma, mean and standard deviation. I'll just tell you up front. I've noticed that in the literature regarding statistics, that accuracy has to do with center or mean, and precision has to do with standard deviation, or how spread out the data is. So accuracy has to do with, are you close to the center or the mean? The bullseye was the metaphor that we used here. So let's talk about Andrew, shall we? Suppose someone is asking the question, how tall is Andrew? Someone says he's 3 feet tall. And then you ask him again and say, well, actually he's 3.14159 feet tall. So it's, wow, you're being really precise. And if you ask some other people, they say, well, he's 3.14 feet tall. It's pi feet tall. This guy's pi feet tall. That's what they're trying to say. They keep asking people. And there's some are more precise than others. To say 3.14159 feet tall, that's being super precise. We often think of precision in terms of how many decimals. In statistics, we think about precision in terms of what's the size of the standard deviation, how big is sigma. So when we were saying an example where there's, like if we're saying, because the truth is that that's not accurate to imply that Andrew's pi feet tall. He's a lot taller than that. That's inaccurate. But some people in their inaccurate estimations of Andrew's height can be more precise and some can be less precise. The point is, it's not accurate to say. That's an example of So bias is a question of accuracy, or mu, what is the center of the survey results. And sampling error has to do with precision, which is measured by the other parameter, sigma. How far off are we from your center? If your center is wrong, it's inaccurate. But you can be really precise and inaccurate. You can say, yes, Andrew is 3.14159 feet tall. That's very precise, but it's not accurate. So that's why we drew these pictures on Friday. And there's just a huge look at, we're looking deep into the parameters mu and sigma, the only two parameters that matter in stats. But we drew these pictures in which we said, well, what if we're trying to hit the target? We're trying to be accurate. We want our surveys to hit the target, and survey after survey comes in. I mean, if there's no bias and no sampling error, that's where we said every single survey hits. I mean, suppose it's really going to be 64% that vote for Peter Roskam. 64%. Next survey, 64%. 64%. Every survey is accurate, and there's precision. It's like there's no sampling error. Sampling error, we said, is deviation. That's why we use standard deviation in conjunction with our discussion of sampling error. Sampling error is deviation from the mean. That's what we said about standard deviation. That's your script. A standard deviation is a particular difference between, is the typical difference between a particular value and the mean. The mean may or may not be accurate, but if there's no bias and no sampling error, then every arrow hits the target. If there is no bias, but yes sampling error, which is most of the time, this is what you want in a survey. You want, not every survey is going to be accurate, but the mean of the surveys, over there, let's see, the mean of the surveys was 65%. You want the mean of the surveys to be on fleek, not off fleek. You want it to be on target, on point, on fleek. Yes, that's what we're looking for. No bias, but yes sampling error. Remember, bias is bad. If you have bias, but no sampling error, that's like going up and asking how many people are going to vote for Peter Roskam, and the first survey says, it's off fleek. Let's say this is 21%. Next survey, 21%. Next survey, 21%. Suppose the truth is 65%, but so it's very precise. There's no sampling error. Sampling error is an issue of precision and standard deviation. Bias is an issue of accuracy and mean or center. So it's very precise, but it's not accurate. If you have a sampling situation where there's bias and sampling error, unfortunately this happens too often, where it's not accurate because the center or the mean of the surveys is off target, but you've also got sampling error. So there it is. That's the opening speech. It's to take a look at these important vocabulary issues of bias on one hand. When we're talking bias, do you think of mean or standard deviation? Yeah, you're off the mean. If you're biased in the center, you're not accurate. Not accurate, you're off the mean. And sampling error. Bias is bad, but sampling error is to be expected. You're going to have sampling error. There's going to be a standard deviation or some imprecision. So, does that help in terms of the way the vocabulary was being used on Friday? Okay, good. I'm seeing some heads going up and down. Assuming, I'm going to interpret that as yes. Head motions. Okay, so you just want to make sure that was there. Now, is it true that on Friday in class, this is where we left off? We did not complete number 17? Yeah. Is that correct? Okay, so let's pick up where we left off on number 17. And be ready, because technology and the way we use our cell phones has so impacted the way we see reality and how we do surveys that even though this book is just the third edition of the book published within the past, has published printings within the past 10 years, some things we just have to update. So let's take a look at this guy right here. Here we go. Picking up where we left off. Okay, so parent opinion, part one. In a large city school system with 20 elementary schools. Now, as soon as I see 20 elementary schools, I'm thinking 20 clusters. It'd be like trying to predict the outcome of a presidential election by looking at the top 20 most populated cities in the United States. Let's see which way these top 20 cities are going to go. We're going to use that as our sampling frame for the entire country, even though not everyone in the country lives in a big city. So I'm wondering if they're going to go cluster sampling. The school board is considering the adoption of a new policy that would require elementary students to pass a test in order to be, what? Pass a test? To go to the next grade? What are they even thinking? Oh well, but they want to find out what people are thinking. The PTA, that's Parent Teacher Association, wants to find out whether parents agree with this plan. What's the truth? What's the true proportion of people who agree with this plan? Listed below are some of the ideas proposed for gathering data for each indicate what kind of sampling strategy is involved. Now, what if they say, let's put a big ad in the newspaper asking people to log their opinions on the PTA website? What immediately comes to mind in terms of what type of sampling strategy that is? Noah?
It's not like for volunteer.
Asking for volunteers, so it's going to have voluntary response bias. This is a voluntary response sample. Only those who see the ad feel strongly about the issue, have web access, will respond. So, bad idea. Next, letter B. How about we randomly select one of the elementary schools and contact every parent by phone? What type of sampling strategy are they using there? Can someone identify the sampling strategy used?
Simple random.
Say that one more time.
Simple random.
Simple random sample. Well, the thing is though, if it's a simple random sample and they randomly select just one elementary school, then the question is, if it's really an SRS, then every imaginable subset of, say, let's say they end up with 50 people in their sample. Every imaginable subset of 50 parents would be equally likely.
So the multi-stage.
Well, in a sense, yes, because cluster sampling, which it is, has a multi-stage character to it. Is that there's two stages. But multi-stage sampling that involves randomly select one cluster and then stage two is take a census of every member of that cluster. That multi-stage sampling strategy has a special name because it's used so often. It's called cluster sampling. This is cluster sampling, but probably not a good idea because the opinions of parents in one school may not be typical or representative of the opinions of all parents. So it's a good review of both cluster and multi-stage. All right, next, unless there's any questions on page 1. Are you on page 2? Oops. Okay, so on page 2, here, I've got an idea. Let's send a survey home with every student and ask parents to fill it out and return it the next day. That's an attempt at a census. It probably will suffer from non-response bias because once it's like you say, okay, kids, put this in your backpack, and then when you get home, give it to your parents. No, that's not going to happen. It's going to stay in the backpack. No one's actually going to give it to their parents. Okay, a few people will. And then they give it to the parents. You think the parents are going to return it the next day? Is this going to happen? No, people are not going to respond. So, I mean, fine, take a census. If you can pull off a census, that'd be fantastic. But this is where you get the one and only type of bias that is the fault of the responder. People are not going to respond. I mean, if you're saying respond and we'll give you $100, then they might respond. Randomly select 20 parents from each elementary school, send them a survey and follow up with a phone call and then a knock on the door every hour until they return the survey within a week. Okay. What type of sampling strategy is that? Tell your shoulder partner. What type of sampling strategy is being described here? Yeah, I love this. Okay, thanks for talking about. I've heard a lot of people talk stratified sampling. Now, interestingly, the 20 schools can be thought of as 20 clusters for cluster sampling. Randomly select a cluster, randomly select 2 or 3 clusters, and then take a census of every parent in that cluster. Or you could think of the 20 schools as 20 strata. And so that's what we're doing here. We're doing stratified sampling. If the follow-up is carried out carefully, the sample should be unbiased, should be accurate. The center of it, the average of it, should actually tell us the truth. Any questions on this important example for relating sampling strategies to the real world? Lewis!
For this question, can we just say this is a simple random?
Thank you for asking. The question is, for those of you who didn't hear it, instead of saying stratified sampling, can we say simple random sample? It's important that you understand why the answer is no and how to argue that this is not a simple random sample. On the first handout for this unit, I gave you a definition of SRS, simple random sample, and that definition stated that in a simple random sample, every subgroup of size n is equally likely to be selected. 20 parents, okay, there's 20 elementary schools, so n is 400. So, do it like this. So, every sample of size 400 is equally likely to be selected. So, we're selecting 400 parents. What if one of the school has 400 parents? I guess one of the ways to argue that this is not an SRS is to say, well, suppose we look at the subset in which all 400 parents are in the same school. I mean, Wheaton Academy has more than 400 sets of parents.
Oh, wait, so different population at different schools will also be not fair? Because if a school has 10,000 parents, it will be 20 out of 10,000.
Yeah, 20, it says, select 20 parents, randomly select 20 parents from each of the 20 elementary schools. 20 from school 1, 20 from school 2, all the way up to 20 from school 20. The reason that's not a simple random sample is because there are some subsets of size 400 that are not possible to even be selected. Their likelihood of being selected is 0, because 400 parents from the same school is as equally, I mean, if it were truly a simple random sample, 400 parents from the same school would be just as likely as whatever comes up when you take 20 from each school, 20 from each of the 20 schools.
Wait, so how would you word this question if it's a simple random?
Yeah, if you wanted simple random sample to be the answer, it would be randomly select 400 parents from the set of all parents in all 20 schools. It's the entire district.
But the problem is if you randomly select 400 people, different schools have different population.
That's true. And that's why people are sometimes motivated to do stratified sampling instead of simple random sampling. So, I mean, if you want a simple random sample, though, there is a way to describe it so that the answer would be this is a simple random sample. Okay? Yes, Nick?
I'm still a little bit confused about the stratified sample. So is it just you take a simple random survey at each individual
Of each stratum. In fact, so the question, for those of you listening at home or, watching this while you're driving, And you just didn't quite hear that question. The question basically is like, how would you really construct a simple random sample? You're actually out jogging right now and listening. AirPods, Wi-Fi. So suppose we had a school system in which in the first school there are 300 parents. In the second school, there are 400 parents, and in the third school, there are 500 parents. And you want a sample of size 100 that is stratified in nature. Well, this has got to be proportionate random sampling from each of these, 5, 9, 12. So there's 1,200 in the population. Capital N equals 1,200. And 300 divided by 1,200 is 25%. So 25% of the sample has got to come from the first school. 400 over 1,200 is 33 and a third percent is 1/3. So 33.3 repeating percent of the sample has to come from the second school, and whatever 5/12 is, 5/12 times 100%. See, 1/4. I have to multiply that by 100. So whatever 500 divided by 12 is, it's what?
41.66.
About 41.6%? Okay, so 41.6%, and these should all add up to 100%. Yep, it does. So
Yes, yes.
good. So that means that we would do, we could do random integer. We would assign all of these 300 a number. So random integer from 1 to 300, I need 25% of 100 is 25. I need 25 people randomly selected from the first school, and then do random integer 1 comma 400 comma, we'll say 33. I need 33 people from the second school, and then random integer 1 comma 500, and we'll call it 42. I need 42 people randomly selected from those 500 people. That way I'll have a stratified sample. So I have proportionate representation in my sample of size 100. Now, if it were a sample size of 200, what if I wanted 200 people? Then I'd have to take 25% of, okay, basically it'd have to be twice as many. So I'd have to take 50 people, 66, and just got to do the math, 84. I need 84 from this. These three numbers will add up to 200, but I'll be honoring these percentages over here. Nick, have I answered your question to your satisfaction?
Yeah, yes, and then I don't think why this makes sense to the question why you randomly select 20 parents from each school is a stratified sample.
Okay, so that's great. So now Nick is saying, well, wait a second. 20 parents from each elementary school, that's assuming that every elementary school has the same population of parents. So you're right, that is assuming that. So it's either stratified sampling in a situation where it just happens that every school has the same population, or it's stratified sampling in a situation where the people who are constructing this stratified sampling are ignoring the requirement that a good stratified sample has proportionate sampling. It is possible to do stratified sampling where you don't do proportionate sampling. You still call it stratified sampling, but it's not proportionate stratified sampling. Good stratified sampling should be proportionate. Okay, so it's not ideal, but it is still stratified sampling. So thanks for asking that. Wow, Isar, you know what? This is my 9th year teaching this course. These are the best questions I've ever gotten on this unit. I've never had students drill down on this, seeking understanding as if it were gold. Let's go to churches, number 19. This is always, back in the public school, this example was always a little cringy. Like, why are we talking about church in school? Isn't this illegal? For your political science class, you'd like it right from the book. you'd like to take a survey from a sample of all the Catholic church members in your city. A list of churches shows 17 Catholic churches within the city limits. Rather than try to obtain a list of all members of all these churches, you decide to pick 3 churches at random. For those churches, you'll get a list of all the current members and contact 100 members at random. So this is multi-stage sampling, just a nice little example of multi-stage. First stage is cluster sampling, and then from each cluster, you're not taking a census. True cluster sampling would be followed up by a census, but here we're taking a simple random sample. So this is multi-stage. What could go wrong with your design? Well, it's a matter of so if any one of the 3 churches you pick at random are not representative of all churches, then your sample will reflect the makeup of the church, not all churches. Also, choosing 100 members at random from each school could introduce bias. The views of members of the smaller churches chosen in the sample will be weighted heavier or heavier. No, it's heavier in your sample and the views of the members of larger churches, especially if the views of the members of that small church differ from the views of the churchgoers at the large church. So the hope is that random sampling will equalize these sources of variability in the long run. Now, the time has come for a quiz. Sadly, it's an ungraded quiz so that we won't get the desirable levels of anxiety that are so fun for teachers to watch when it's a graded quiz, but it will probably generate some anxiety nonetheless. On this ungraded quiz, I would like you to, without notes, fill in from memory the 6 sampling strategies and the 5 types of bias. We're going to hit pause while so you might have been struggling. Hello, we're in the thing that says 5.3. Sampling strategies are convenience, simple random, stratified, cluster, systematic, and multi-stage. So if you don't know those, study them. I hope you're reading chapter 12. And bias is bad because that's a script you've seen before. The bias is bad script. Now, for the types of biases, I don't care what order you do them in, but please be consistent about crossing off voluntary response bias, non-response convenience. This is undercoverage due to poor sampling frame. That's where the focus is. And the 2 umbrella types of biases there's 2 types. Response bias are all the types of bias that are the fault of the engineer of the survey, and non-response bias, which is the only type of bias that's the fault of the people who respond to the survey. So if you can't come up with a specific way to describe the fault of the survey engineer, just call it response bias. But there are certain types of response bias that show up so often, like voluntary response bias, convenience bias, which is, I'm just going to talk to my friends. I'm not asking for volunteers. I'm just going to lazily talk to my friends. Undercoverage due to poor sampling frame. Those are all in the red response bias, under the red response bias umbrella. So 3 specific types of response bias, and then there's general response bias, and then non-response bias. Now, what we're looking at here today is we're out on the playground. Problem 20. Some people have been complaining that the playground at the municipal park is too small. It's in need of repair. Managers of the park decide to survey city residents to see, do you believe them? Oh, you don't have that one? You don't have number 20? Yeah, let me see what you have. Oh, you have something slightly different. And the county on the back. You know what? Oh, yeah. Okay, so tell you what. These questions, we are going to hit those at the beginning of class round. So hold on to this. Let's go to the back side, which has the counting example. And I think I'm going to pull up the accounting example right now. Let me just, we will actually talk about the bottom of this first page here, about what's going on. This is a brief episode of Statistics in the News. Sex, drugs are more common in hypertexting teens. According to Mike Stobie, who's an AP medical writer, back in 2010, he wrote, teens who text 120 times a day or more, and there seems to be a lot of them, are more likely to have had sex or used alcohol and drugs than kids who don't send as many messages, according to provocative new research. Like, Suddenly everyone's awake. The study's authors aren't suggesting that hypertexting causes students to have sex. See, leads to, that's the language of causation. No, it's not that texting causes drinking, drugs, but they say it's startling to see an apparent association or link between excessive messaging and that kind of risky behavior. The study concludes that a significant number of teens are very susceptible to peer pressure, and they also have permissive or abusive parents. And also have permissive, or I'm sorry, absent parents, said Dr. Scott Frank, the study's lead author. Now, it's not abusive, just absent. It's a particular form of abuse called neglect. Now, if parents are monitoring their kids' texting and social networking, they're probably monitoring other activities as well, said Frank, an associate professor of epidemiology and biostatistics. Oh, yeah, biostatistics, you might be interested in going in that field. Case Western, it's over in Ohio. Frank was scheduled to present the study Tuesday at a meeting of the American Public Health Association. The study was done at, check this out, 20 public high schools, Cleveland area, so it's like 20 clusters. But it's just in Cleveland. They picked Cleveland to get this data. It's based on confidential paper surveys of more than 4,200 students. So they probably did stratified sampling. That's probably what they did. They're not telling us. We have to read between the lines. But it found that about 1 in 5 students were hypertexters. Ooh, what's 1 in 5? 1 in 5, that's a p-hat. It's not the true, like how many students are really hypertexters? I mean, do you know, Peter? Do you know the truth? Do you know what the true proportion of teenagers in the United States that text more than 120 times a day is?
No.
No, but if we did, that would be the parameter. Okay, so actually P is another parameter. P mu sigma is a parameter. We usually don't do surveys to find the true standard deviation. We could. So correction to what I said earlier today, the main parameters that we look at are the true mean, what's the center of the mean, what's the center proportion. Here they're trying to get at the true proportion of hypertexters out there. About 1 in 25 fall into both categories of being a hypertexter and also a hyper-networker, those who spend 3 or more days on Facebook or Instagram or, what is it, Snapface? No. It's not Snapface. So anyway, so it goes on. But this real-world example, oh, by the way, when they started asking students what's going on, with this, what do you think of this study? One suburban Cleveland student said that her texts involved non-sexual small talk with friends, homework assignments, and student council bake sales. Quote, I text with my mother about what time I need picked up, unquote, said Tiara Freeman Sargent, a 14-year-old Shaker high school freshman. She said that she sends and receives about 250 texts a day about what time she wants to be picked up by her mom. Okay? So anyway, it's interesting to hear what people say. So anyway, so remember what the purpose is. In case you're wondering, what are we even doing here in school? Why are we learning how to design surveys? There's 2 purposes. We want to collect data to uncover associations. There might be linkages, but the other thing we want to do is collect data to calculate statistics that might approximate parameters. So sometimes we take a survey because we want the mean of, what's the mean number of times that people text per day, X bar. That approximates the true parameter mu. What is the true average number of texts per day? Or we might be our survey might be set up to approximate p-hat. What proportion of people are hypertexters? So X bar would be like, what's the mean number of texts that you send per day? P-hat would be the proportion of teenagers that are hypertexters. So that would approximate the parameter P. So what purposes are being served in the hypertexting article is both. In the first study mentioned hypertexting article are the variables quantitative or categorical. Those were categorical. It's like you're either a hypertexter or a hyper-networker, and you're either sexually active or drinking and doing all this stuff, or you're not. And how about this statement, is 1 to 5 students are hypertexters, is that a statistic or a parameter? Well, it is a statistic because it's a p-hat is 0.2. It's trying to approximate the true proportion of people who are hypertexters. So again, it's really important since we did start out talking about parameters. And I was making a big deal about the parameters mu and sigma. Well, yeah, Mu and sigma are both parameters. But when it comes to surveys, we usually don't conduct a survey to find out what the true sigma of a population is. We do conduct surveys to find out what the true mean is. What is the mean number of texts that teenagers send per day? Only God knows. But your survey only God knows the parameter. But you, as a survey engineer, can learn the statistic. You can find the X bar that approximates mu. What is the true proportion of people who are going to vote for Peter Roskam? That's the other parameter. Mean is one parameter, proportion is the other. Proportion, P. Only God knows that. 7 days in front of the election, 8 days in front of the election. But the survey engineer can get a statistic, a P hat, to approximate P. So, we're in good shape for today. There is a homework assignment that says it's due tomorrow. You know, I'm going to push the homework assignment back to Wednesday. What I want you to do instead for tomorrow is do that practice quiz. So do the practice quiz for tomorrow. If you didn't get the practice quiz, I'll give it to you now.